Welcome to ARC360 On Demand. Brought to you in association with corporate partners BASF, BMS, CAPS, Copart, Emax, Integral, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Merca, Nationwide Vehicle Recovery Assistance, S&G Response, and Sherwin-Williams, along with our partners Aztec, the Green Part Specialists, Indasa, Innovation Group, and Prasco UK. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome along to ARC360 On Demand, the mobility special. I'm Mark Aioi, co-founder of ARC360. Thank you all so much for joining us, and please do feel free to make direct contact with myself at mark@iloveclaims.com if you've got any observations or thoughts on today's show. So we're delighted this week to bring you some of the highlights from a recent exclusive ILC Motor Roundtable event held in partnership with Enterprise Rent-A-Car. The Mobility, Evolution or Revolution session brought together ILC motor corporate partners and insurer partners, along with invited guests to discuss the changing landscape for mobility and explore just what it means for those involved in the mobility sector. The session was led by panellists Greg Cole, UK Claims Director of Andy, Dean Lander, Head of Repair Sector Services, Thatcham Research, Richard Price, Aftersales Director, BMW UK Limited, and Stuart Sandell, Assistant Vice President, Sales UK and Ireland, Enterprise Holdings. The roundtable type session created much engagement and stimulated a variety of conversation points as to how mobility, influenced by numerous market forces, will shape the future of the claims sector. From consumer demand to vehicle technology, multi-modality insurance, and as-a-service offerings, the following session highlights just how all these areas are converging to make travel a very exciting sector to be involved in right now. Enjoy the following extracts of the conversation.
I think really casting the mind back to 2020, sort of you go pre-pandemic time, I think we were starting to see, and I'll try and contextualise this a little bit around what's relevant for kind of the insurance and the claims community. We were starting to see a bit of a shift around people's direction in terms of like mass mobility. And I think we'll touch on that again as we head to more the longer term stuff. But there was definitely an adoption of different types of transportation starting. So in our world, that would be things like our car clubs are really starting to gain some traction and working in mobility as a service space. So people taking multimodal journeys. So they're in a car, then maybe on a bike using public transport. I do think that the pandemic certainly put the brakes on that a little bit, because people's attitudes, as we all saw, towards different modes of transport suddenly started to shift. So public transport was a place to avoid all of a sudden. Multi-occupancy vehicles were something that people weren't so comfortable with. And I think we certainly saw this immediate shift to single occupancy vehicles. We had certain sectors that even went to where you might have perhaps construction services where they'd send 4 or 5 employees in one vehicle to a site. They were now sending 4 or 5 employees in 5 different vehicles to a site. So saw some immediate and unusual shifts that were driven somewhat by the pandemic. But I think now what we're starting to see is we are emerging from, we are still within the pandemic, but we're emerging from it. And there's, as things start to ease, what we are certainly starting to see is people reverting back to the car very, very quickly as a primary mode of travel. And all you have to do is look at the data which is produced by like the DFT every Wednesday. I haven't looked at it today, but or the Apple mobility data. TomTom do some really good data around congestion. And we're starting to see a shift in when people are using their cars from the pre-pandemic time. So travel and transport, particularly in the car, was very much weighted around sort of the Monday peak. Then there's the rush hour in the mornings. It's much more weighted towards the end of the week now. So we're seeing a huge increase in volumes of incidents where we get called upon for replacement vehicles Friday, Saturday, Sunday, as people are traveling, socializing, staycationing, and all of those things. So I think that's a real immediate and short-term difference to what we had pre-pandemic. And I foresee that extending out through the summer period. What that looks like sort of as we head into autumn, winter, whether there's a leveling off to a more typical trend, do people start going back to their offices and things more? I think it's a little I'm unsure about, but I'd certainly say that. And the other piece, which I think in our world right now, and I know we'll touch on it, is we're really seeing this emergence of alternative fuel vehicles, plug-in hybrid, full electric vehicles. And I do see that as a short-term thing that's going to continue to grow with the government incentivizing things around like, benefit in kind on electric vehicles. I do think that's going to accelerate quicker than perhaps a lot of the infrastructures may be even ready for.
We've seen a shift, therefore, in terms of how we deal as an operation with this changing demand. So core hours, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, traditionally kind of like a 75-25 split at times, and particularly last summer, and we're expecting a similar trend this summer, potentially 55-45, 60-40, so much more in the non-core. In terms of other trends, I guess a really obvious one is usage-based insurance. So I think despite some of the premium rebates, the customer demand for UBI has undoubtedly increased. I think Buy Miles is a good case study there from a purely pay per mile perspective. Insure the Box, obviously one of the early iterations of a UBI proposition, and we've seen the obvious shift, as you'd expect, towards lower mileage policies, much less top-up miles as lockdown increases. I suppose the point there is that demand is clearly there for some degree of flexibility from consumers, and I think that's something that will probably be a bit of a theme of today is flexibility and agility in responding to some of these changes. The other bit, I guess, just with the insurer hat on, is the here and now with mobility. So Andy, as an organisation, we've been explicitly positioning ourselves as a connected mobility protection provider, and I think we're still kind of working out what that means entirely with all the changes in technology and consumer behaviour. But on one hand, we've got a really close relationship with Toyota. They've openly stated that they're transitioning from a car manufacturer into a mobility company. They've recently launched, I think, only their third global brand, which is Kinto, after Toyota and Lexus, which is a one-stop shop mobility solution. So leasing, subscription, car sharing, carpooling, all of these things are actually imminent, or if not already launched, under that Kinto brand. So I think that's occupying a lot of our thoughts at the moment. How do we provide the insurance, the protection, the warranty, and provide these wide range of flexible solutions to meet these requirements, because they're here. It's the here and now.
At the very highest level, we get very accurate data on how many of the cars that we have that are connected move and what distance they travel. Not personal data, so it's kind of anonymised, but it allowed us to really understand what was happening and why we weren't seeing anybody, because a handful of cars were moving or relatively. The distances were much lower, and it's taken a long time. And the other thing we had interestingly, you had that data by country. So we could look at China, we could look at Italy, we could look at countries that were ahead of us in the pandemic and look at the tracking that they'd seen, and we were behind the pace in terms of infection, and to try and predict what might happen going forward. I think the good news right now is that mileage is back to about 98%. It's probably slightly flattered by the number of people that are doing the travel to their a holiday cottage rather than leaving the car at the airport. So I think the staycation definitely has an impact. But there are also some other far-reaching effects that we've had. For example, the government extension on MOT meant that we've got a big period of time right now for the last couple of months, and really till September, where nobody needs an MOT apart from the first MOT. There's a lot of people out there. There's 6 million cars out in the park needing an MOT that's overdue at the moment. So that pent-up demand we're going to have to try and contend with. I think my tip of the day is if your car needs an MOT around September, I'd get it done early if I were you, because I think the industry is going to struggle to meet the demand. But and I think also very relevant today is that the area of the business that's been slowest to recover by a country mile is body shop. The accident rate is clearly much reduced, and it's been the slowest thing to recover. But obviously, with mileages increasing, there's clearly a correlation between the distance travelled and the accident rate.
The key kind of underlying theme here, traffic stopped moving, people started to be at home more often, claims started to reduce, body shops started to see less numbers. I think most mature body shops kind of sorted themselves out, right-sized themselves, and are almost in a position now where you can build back better. You can see the job market opening up quite significantly. But I think the one thing that didn't slow down was the evolution of the technology on the vehicles. We can, EVs doubled their growth in sales while everything else kind of stood still, as a prime example. So I think the biggest challenge for body shops as they come back and start to see claims, are they seeing the same cars coming in having had accidents that they did a year ago or a year plus ago when they really started to see this reduction in volumes? And I think that's the biggest challenge in a body shop world. I think most have right-sized themselves, got themselves into a position, probably still slightly over reliance on government support and furlough schemes. We've seen claims slowly increase, but have we reached the plateau? Is 75%, 80% the kind of new normal that insurers and body shops and everybody will be working with based on the amount of travel that comes about?
Do you think the body repair nationally, like I'm sure there are groups that are in fantastic shape, but do you think nationally they're ready at the same pace as the amount of vehicles that are going to be coming in? Because whilst I'm no expert, I know you need special equipment and technology just to safely handle an electric vehicle, let alone carry out the repair that may be required on it.
Yeah, no, I think, and I've appeared stating it in many articles and on many of these very webinars, they're not ready. In no way, sense or shape is anybody within the claims ecosystem ready. There's not enough skilled people to be able to work on the vehicles. There's not enough knowledge in the non-skilled peoples to understand how to stay safe in an environment around an accident damaged electric vehicle. I know at Thatcham Research, a huge amount of our focus over the last 12 months and continuing over the next 12 to 18 months will be on the safe adoption of EV technology across the markets, working with body shops to try and make sure that they've got the skills and competence to be able to deal with these things, collaborating with vehicle manufacturers like BMW to ensure that this technology is rolled out in a safe and adoptable manner, and trying to make sure that these cars don't become throwaway items, because the battery, which is it's a serviceable item of the vehicle, but now it's the most expensive serviceable item of the vehicle, and the slightest amount of damage can create a completely different triage route within an insurance claim structure. And who's making that decision, and can they actually see whether that decision needs to be made or not? Because very often that decision is going to be made too late, when the exposure to the dangers of being engaged with an EV vehicle with some kind of significant damage to the HV system, the exposure to that's going to be too late. People will have already had their hands on, they'll already be assessing the vehicle, they'll be doing things that they shouldn't be doing based on the information that's buried within the vehicle manufacturer's data. Quarantining of a vehicle is a real thing, and in some cases it's an essential thing. But where do you find that information out? Where does it currently exist? Who's responsible for quarantining it? Through the supply chain. Those are real live issues, and with over 500,000 fully electric vehicles on the road today, and that just growing astronomically month on month. I think that's a massive challenge for the industry to come together and talk about and find solutions to.
We're putting a lot of energy and effort into making sure that we've got the right training in place. And actually, the quarantine of a vehicle is relevant for accident damage and even mechanical repair in reality, because in various situations these cars are highly dangerous, and I think there is a big risk that they'll end up in the wrong hands in the future. But I think this is still, despite the fact there's been a lot of progress in the last year around EV sales. The truth is, it's only scratching the surface of the cars on the road at the moment. If you look at we've got quite an aggressive plan for rolling out fully electric, and we started that journey on PHEV initially. But in reality, even if you fast forward 10 years, it still won't tip the balance between the electric vehicles on the road and the combustion vehicles. So we're at that stage now where there needs to be a disproportionate investment in gearing up and getting ready for the capability with a relatively small return because of the volume of cars on the road. But it's going to ramp, but it's actually going to be ramping up quite slowly. So the mix of work in a mechanic or a body shop is still going to be very much weighted towards combustion vehicles as opposed to fully electric.
Yeah, Richard, just on that though, I'd like to get your opinion on this, because really new technology, things like this haven't really changed. There's always something new that comes along on cars, and you're right about the level of investment that's required and the tipping of the balance. And in most cases, you can, as a body shop business or a mechanical repair and servicing business, you can judge when to make that investment based on its return. But you only need to see one EV vehicle to have the danger appear on the danger to your workforce appear on your workshop floor. And I think that's the difference when we talk about EV. ADAS was a prime example. You could judge on when to invest in the capability to recalibrate based on business demand. How many were we seeing? We're not seeing enough. We'll keep sending it away to somebody else to do it. We don't need to do it currently. And then a tipping of the balance is coming, and you're seeing more and more body shops investing in the capability because they're now seeing it as a commercial advantage to be able to do it within their business.
Yeah.
Can they really be turning away EVs currently in their business? Can they say that's an EV vehicle? I don't touch or do anything on an electric vehicle, because there's a majority of circumstances where you won't have to touch the HV system to replace the windscreen, to take the bumper off and replace the bumper. The HV system can stay active on the vehicle. It doesn't even have to be isolated in most cases, because you're not interfering at all with that system.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of points. I think if we go back to when we as a brand, when we started selling electric cars, we didn't have every one of our retailer partners selling them because it was low volume. So it didn't make sense to have them in every showroom, because it was an investment that probably wasn't worth making in the short term. I think that holds true a little bit with some repairers at the moment, because you're right. In terms of a full repair on the vehicle with all of the dangers that exist, there are a lot of body shops that wouldn't want to invest in that in the short term right now, with very little throughput to follow that's going to recover that investment. So I think in the short term, I think the industry needs to be almost a select element of the industry. I know there's a lot of kind of insurers and insurer partners on the call today, but if I was placing business in electric cars into a body shop network, I'd probably be looking at more of a select network within my existing network to say that these are the ones that, for me, tick the box. They've got the relevant investment training. I feel safe that those cars are going to go in and they're going to be capable of carrying out the repairs, but it's not necessarily going to be everyone. I think that list would grow over time. And I guess I say that as a brand that's investing heavily, so I'll give you a number afterwards. But no, I think, no, seriously, I think in terms of the investment required, and let's face it, right now is not the best time for a lot of people to be investing heavily. They're not, it's not on the back of a couple of really solid years, is it? It's on the back of a really distressing 15, 16 months. So I think my view is that the volume will come, but it won't come in the short term. And I think that individual body shops have to make the decision, but I think they probably should declare themselves in or out. Although I do take the point that there are certain elements of a repair that you can do without actually having to be, having to go through that training. So without actually touching the electric, you've still got, depending on the situation, you've still got to assess the vehicle though initially to make sure that it's safe to work on. Yeah,
which I think kind of centres back round to that point. I agree entirely with everything you just said. And we, I for one in the body shop sector have been saying for a long time that body shops need to choose what they're going to specialise in. Are they going to be generous? Are they going to be specialists? And if so, what are they going to specialise in? Yeah. The electric vehicle, as you just said right at the end there, you need to find out at the assessment stage to make a decision. And if that assessment stage is taking place at the body shop, which I think in the majority of cases, the assessment that will tell you if the HV system is damaged or not will occur at the body shop. It's already there. The expense of getting it there, the expense of trying to move it if it needs to move, or just the pressure on the people involved in doing the job to try to do the job, to push it into the workflow, I think is one of the challenges that is resolvable, but the industry needs to know that it needs to be resolved. But
I'm only thinking aloud, but it feels like an immobilised vehicle in an accident probably feels like you should only go to a body shop that actually has because my gut feel is that if a car's had a lot of us, we know a lot of the incidents are just shunts in traffic, and probably it's pretty safe. I think if the car's been in something more serious, then I don't think you should go anywhere near a body shop that's not absolutely qualified to do that in safe and has got all the relevant training. I think that's a critical point. And I think if I look at carbon repair facilities going back many years, when we were sort of emerging or launching into that arena, I think we had 3 or 4 in the whole country. So we had one ourselves and one in Ireland, Northern Ireland, one in Birmingham, one in the south. So it was no way we were going to equip all our body shops with the investment required to complete those carbon repairs, but we needed to have the capability. And I think that's going to come back to the same point, Arno, that we need I think the insurers and the partners of insurers need to make sure that they've got a proper study of who's capable of doing that and the work is being placed appropriately.
I think there's a couple of things here. Mark, I know you're asking about the makeup of our fleet and that, and maybe I'll come back to that in a second, but focusing on the EV piece, and I see this very much like the ADAS piece, and I see there's a question from Adrian, and hopefully I can address that at the same point in this response. The first thing we did with the ADAS piece was about trying to identify which repairers are capable of handling these kind of vehicles. It's exactly the same with EV. We need to understand what repairers are capable of what. And I think in the short term, it's about making the right decision with all the information at that point in time and the historical information together with that. So we say it's an EV. You use technology and tools and systems to identify a repairer that is EV approved or suitable or certified, and you place that repair with that body shop. And that's where it goes and that's where it stays. Over time, the early adopters of EV and the fleets that have more EVs will get more information and more data, and will know more about these kind of repairs and these kind of incidents like we do today. And it will probably bleed into that connected piece when there's more AI available as well, where we will start to be able to say, well, actually, we can see from the accident or the assessment or the pictures or the video, whatever it might be that we bring all the information together on, this is an EV, but actually it's only a headlamp and a bumper, which we know doesn't need to go to an EV specialist repairer, so we can place it there. So I think it happens over time as we get more data and information, because whilst there are a number of these cars in the general sort of car park now. They're still a small number proportionate, and I think we've all got a lot to learn about them. So I think from a customer perspective, we need to make sure that we focus on the customer now and what their needs are, and treat them, understanding they have an EV and they need to be treated as an EV driver without moving them from around and about, once you put someone into a body shop, to hopefully cover a little bit of Adrian's question there. Just on the other point that you raised, Mark, about what are we seeing in terms of the vehicle park, EV is really has lots and lots of different opinions around it. So for us as a large fleet owner and operating in a rental fleet, it's really just an inevitability that the fueling of the vehicles is going to have to change. And we've got the 2030 legislation about petrol and diesel vehicle production. So it's coming. So we can't all kind of hide behind our, doomsday and say, oh no, it's going to be awful. We've got to accept that it's coming. So we have to learn about those vehicles and understand what the challenges are, whether that's about the infrastructure around charging them, whether that's about how our customers can use them and understand them, but they're going to be coming into our general population of vehicles. And what we're starting to see is different sectors adopting things at different rates. So public sector in particular is really, really big on, local government, local council, on alternative fuel vehicles. So we're placing a lot of vehicles with plugs on them, some of them full EV, some of them PHEV, and even some of them hydrogen, actually, with public sector bodies. We're learning a lot. They have better charging infrastructure. When we look at insurance claims, if somebody drives an EV, we'll now provide them with an EV for a replacement vehicle where we can, or where that's supported by our insurance partner. And for those people, it's easy because they already know what it's like to own an EV. They might have a plug point at home, or they know where they charge it at work. The big gap and the big white space is all the people that don't own an EV and have all of the fears, like I had a week ago when I went on my first long journey in an EV, about how do I charge it, what happens with this, and just getting comfortable with it. And we're starting to offer more people EVs out of our fleet, or plug-in vehicles, to try and familiarise them, and also so we can learn about them. And then you get other things like the low emission zones, which drive some pieces. So we're starting to put commercial electric vehicles out. So the EV tow van's a popular one at the moment, which is going to a lot of our customers that operate in and around London and those areas. So there's definitely a swing towards it, and the OEMs are pushing those vehicles into big fleet owners like ourselves as well. So it is an inevitability. So we all have to collectively learn and share that information and learnings, so we get better at it, and we get better at fixing them. We get better at understanding how to charge them and ensuring that people can access those kind of vehicles.
Add one more, I guess, I think here and now from an insurer perspective. So I mentioned, Kinto's doing its thing from a mobility company. I think the other here and now is the rise of platforms. So you ride share platforms, you delivery platforms, Deliveroos, Ubers, Lyfts, and so on. And they're here to stay, regardless, I think, of some of the emerging trends we're seeing, or conflicted by COVID, or whatever it might be. The insurance there is embedded with these platforms. And I think there's a recognition that traditional products don't really hit the spot in terms of meeting those insurance needs. But I think we're definitely seeing a move away from traditional personal lines, from traditional products, to these more bespoke solutions that we have to provide for these mobility platforms. So that's consequences for how we underwrite and price, but even for claims, I think we like to get as much volume through the machine as possible to leverage scale and leverage efficiencies. But we're really thinking at the moment, well, if we've got to deal with these different clients and different platforms, how do we build the capability to deliver bespoke claim solutions? I think the more forward-thinking claims teams and TPAs will be building that capability to do that, because that traditional personal lines focus, I think, is changing as we speak.
I think connected car is with us now, and I always put this little disclaimer before I speak. When I talk about connected cars, I just talk about cars that can talk to the internet or talk to a cloud, not cars that talk to each other. So that's what I see as a connected car. So as a business, we are using connected vehicle technology for very simple things initially: mileage on a car, fuel reading on a car. And in our commercial vehicle flexi rent business, we're starting to do more around maintenance. So taking scheduled and unscheduled maintenance events from vehicles that are not necessarily connected because they had something in the vehicle already, but with an aftermarket telematics solution that can connect to us and tell us that it needs a service or it's got a fault with a brake or whatever it might be, and start a process of an incident being handled or like a claim. I think what we're seeing in the general market now, and you know, new vehicle owners will definitely recognise this, is private motor vehicles being connected. So your own car having a e-call or whatever the manufacturer has titled that as a way to respond to an incident. And again, personal experience, last week on Wednesday, my wife's car broke down and she pressed the button in the car to call through for the incident to be logged. Now that for me, I think is the really interesting point, particularly for this audience, around claims, which is how will motor claims shift when the decision on what to do is taken away from the driver's sort of long known ways of handling things. So I think the general population today, if you said, what do you do if you have an accident? You're going to pick the phone up and phone your insurance company a large proportion of the time. There'll be other, but let's say at least 80%. Now, when that decision's taken away because the car may be reporting it for you or giving you the option to do that, that changes the motor claims experience quite dramatically for me. And it also changes the parties that will be involved in that. And I think obviously with the people we've got here today, you know, with Richard, with BMW and Greg having been at the beginning of that really, because Insure the Box technically the beginning of connected car, I think this is could be a real step change in how motor claims are handled, because I think we're going to see a shift in where notification or how notification happens.
It'll be interesting how we get there, because I guess there's two perspectives I can give. In Italy, Toyota just launched a hybrid insurance product, which is using simple telemetry data from the connected vehicle, and it's just percentage of miles driven in hybrid mode. You know, it gives you a better rating, better price than using the petrol. So Toyota are using it to encourage and complement the sale of hybrid vehicles, and it's working really well. I think it's the first insurance product they've ever advertised on TV, which says a lot. Then in the UK, I guess, I think we're at this interesting point in that it's an incredibly competitive market. The data cost is, in terms of infrastructure, is still quite costly in terms of you've got to collect it, you've got to store it, you've got to analyze it. At the moment, it's probably not far off an aftermarket telematics device. And so the new vehicles that are connected, you could argue, are probably lower risk anyway. So I think we're not quite there in terms of seeing that margin for insurers in I guess connected, taking the place of telematics. And we've obviously seen telematics adoption plateau a little bit in recent years. I guess will that change as connected cars become the norm? And can we realise value from that data? And I guess will VMs keep that within their own ecosystem and work exclusively with insurance partners? Will they sell the data in a pooled model, the kind of LexisNexis type approach, where they just provide a score to insurers? So I think that there's that bit from a kind of proposition point of view. But I think you're right, Stu, then from a pressing a button and being connected, and regardless of who you're insured with, that kind of accident management piece, that's a potential real game changer, because we've seen from telematics that we can influence behavior, we can influence the claims process. Surely connected vehicles and richer data just opens that up to more people.
Points just on connected car, because we've got a high level of connectivity with the vehicle. I think the connected customer is a different matter. So if I just think for the moment, focusing on the car, there's an awful lot of data that we get in terms of what's required on the vehicle. We don't run on a traditional maintenance schedule, for example, on mileage. It's all condition-based servicing, which means the car determines what service requirements. So cost of ownership is reduced because you're not changing things just purely on a mileage regime. But what we realised probably 3 years ago or so, that we were developing lots of different apps to provide lots of different solutions to customers, without really looking at it through their mindset and understanding what exactly they want. So we kind of internally had a rule to say, right, no more app development at all. We will have 2 apps. We'll have one for BMW, one for Mini, my BMW, my Mini, and we will drive the value for the customer through there. And we want that, the objective being to be one of those few apps that you have on your smartphone that you really get value from. So, on a broader basis, for example, you can track your car, you can flash the lights, open the doors, you can actually trigger software upgrades on your vehicle, you can book a service, you can call it roadside assistance and track the resources it's arriving to you. So almost every week we're adding more and more value for the customer, but also managing your service requirements, your body, in terms of the body shop communication, all that stuff is being fed into there as well. But ultimately, this is all information that is really for the value of the customer, but it developed in order for them to develop some loyalty with those customers, so they're happy to stay with you and to work with us as well. It's a kind of reciprocal thing. I know it's one of the questions around, manufacturers got all this data but not sharing it with insurers, and actually we're very open to share information with insurers, but equally. And there's also a comment on the race for FNOL as well. And in reality, we've all got, I don't think that the objectives of people on this call are any different. I think we're all wanting the best possible experience for the customer, the quickest possible repair times and costs. But obviously, clearly there are some conflicts within that. But I think, we could work a lot smarter together to kind of share some of this information, but it isn't necessarily our information.
As the conversation has gone on there's 2 very different aspects that we're trying to look at from here. There's how do we price an insurance policy using data that's with the vehicle about its use, and how do we use the vehicle's connected capability to create a claims process that's actually much more efficient and much more effective. 2 things are 2 very different things, but an insurer clearly wants to bring them together because they want the policy to be right, but they also want to make sure the claims cost is right, because if the 2 things are disjointed, everybody's losing. If the 2 things are joined together, the consumer can win, and that's most important. So I think the policy kind of trying to use a customer-owned piece of data to create a policy pricing is much harder than getting a car to make a claim, because the technology is already there. eCall will allow it to communicate to whoever you want it to communicate to. We've got algorithm-based AI in the marketplace now assessing damage based on photographs. Well, it's not too difficult for the car with all its sensing technology to capture that data without the need for a photograph and put it through those AI algorithms. And therefore, you've got a claim, you've got a very basic estimate of the claim, you've definitely got a report that tells you what operates and what doesn't operate, so is the car drivable? Got the capability for the car to communicate to multiple parties. So it can communicate to the insurer and say, I've had an accident, you've got a claim coming your way. It can communicate to the vehicle manufacturer, can communicate to the recovery agent and the emergency services. It can book itself into the body shop if it's drivable. All of those things, and Stuart's absolutely right, this is the media talk. We can see all of the capabilities. Somebody's just got to pick up the piece of string and tie it around all the different dots to see how the process will work. Let me paint a futuristic journey for you, Mark.
Go on, Dean.
I'm leaving my house. It's a weekday, so I'm going on that commute to the office that nobody does anymore, right? And I'm leaving my house. I've got about 2 or 3 kilometres to kind of travel on my little e-scooter that gets me to the pod that allows me to travel around the town and city that I'm leaving. I get out of the pod and I get into that enterprise hired car that takes me on the automated highway all the time, I've got the scooter still with me because I either own the scooter or I've actually just hired the scooter from the pod point and I keep it as long as I need it. The car drops me off at the next pod point in the town where I work. The pod point takes me to the nearest e-scooter destination. And I jump back on and do that last kilometre of my journey to the office. At the weekend, I've got the problem. I've got all the kids. I've got a holiday to go on. I've got luggage. So I think there's a point coming where there's the convenience of the commute, where you're going to use that multimodal kind of journey. But somebody's got to resolve, how do I leave my house with a suitcase and still have the same level of convenience? And I think that's your hail riding stuff. That's your kind of Ubers of this world and stuff like that. Come and pick me up, human driver, trained driver in a trained car, come and pick me up with my luggage and my kids and going on holiday, take me to the automated highway. I'll still get into that same car, probably a bigger one that Stuart's provided me, and got to the other end and done the same thing. And that changes the dynamics of car, any kind of mode of transport, opportunity, purchase, ownership. But I still think there's going to be a thing in my mind. It's probably because I'm a middle-aged man. I always think there's going to be this tipping point when you're in your late 20s, early 30s. You've found your hopefully lifelong partner. You had your first kid. You're going to go out and buy a car. I still think you're going to go out and buy a car. I still think you're going to accept that it's the most expensive asset that you've purchased and it depreciates at a ridiculous rate and it sits there idle on your driveway for best part of 16 hours, 17 hours a day. But I just think as humans, we're always going to want that convenience of having my car on my drive.
Dean, I'm going to pick up 2 or 3 points you made there, and I don't disagree with that last point at all. And I do think there's also a subscription piece somewhere within this, which I think really fits into the Kinto thing that you've talked about as well, Greg. But this isn't whilst this is not mass adoption yet, this isn't as conceptual as kind of almost, all the things you made, I can imagine today. So we have a division now which is completely around innovation and mobility as a service, and that's really where our focus is as that sector to look at. So you talked about the hub. So we've done a partnership with BP. It's out in Greenwich. It's the first mobility hub that's been launched in a collection of businesses in there. And that hub
almost teed you up there, Stuart, didn't it?
Really did. That hub has some car clubs. It has some bike share. It has some Amazon lockers there, so you can have your delivery there during the day whilst you're out in one of those vehicles, and a handful of other services. And it's all solar powered and electric and all the things you'd expect it to be. So those hubs, I think, will become more and more prevalent, and there'll be shared services within there. So it won't just be, if you think about London now, there's the bikes and it's just the bikes. Or if you go to Paris, there's just scooters lying all over the floor everywhere. They're everywhere. But there'll be more like a shared hub. What we launched this week, actually, and this wasn't teed up for today, but it just happened to drop in, was in the Highlands and Islands in Scotland, a system called Go High, which is a collaboration between the government bodies up there and a vast number of service providers, which we're one of, where if you live in the Highlands and Islands, you can access something called Go High. So it's an app on the App Store, and there you can access all kinds of mobility through that one app. So that could be stagecoach, it could be the trains up there, it could be taxis, could be airlines, and it's all in one place. And we're included in that. Brompton Bikes on there. And actually what we found is, whilst the focus a lot of the time has been around the urban areas for these mobility hubs, and that's been the place where people think they are immediately at need, there's actually more of a requirement where it's a bit more of a fractured infrastructure and there's more geography to cover. So if I am going to go to one car maybe in my family, I need to have reliance of lots and lots of services. And the way those mobility as a service applications work is it's your ticketing platform, if you want, as well. So you go on there and you pay for it all. It's not I've got to go and buy a ticket for this and have a login for that scooter hire and have a different app for that car club and a different app for the bus, and I need to go to the ticket booth for the train. It's all in one place. So you can plan your entire journey. It will tell you which bits to use, and you make your payments on that platform, and it's your ticketing. That, I think, is a much more sustainable long-term solution, but it's part of, and it gets overused, and I've used it probably on an ARC before, it's an ecosystem, because it's one of the things that you use as a consumer. And maybe, you know, the 20-somethings, the millennials or whoever are going to be quicker to adopt these pieces. It could then fall into these subscription ideas, these platforms where I don't own a car, I own access to a vehicle or a number of vehicles, depending on what my need is, and some other mobility services. And I think some of that is already in today's world. It's just a case of it's in that very early stage. You know, it's not something where, you know, anyone's going to make any money for a good period of time, because it's very conceptual.
Thank you to Greg, Dean, Richard and Stuart there for what was a really fascinating insight into the changing world of mobility. With so many influences on the sector, both emerging and pre-existing, it really is important to try and understand how these changes will impact and ultimately cascade down the supply chain. It's clear many grey areas remain, but there is no doubt change is well underway across the sector and impacting all stakeholders. It's likely collaboration has never been more important within the sector as we move into a very new and exciting period of change for all. Thanks for joining us. This has been the ARC360 On Demand.
Thank you for watching ARC360 On Demand. Brought to you in association with corporate partners BASF, BMS, CAPS, Copart, Emax, Integral, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Merca, Nationwide Vehicle Recovery Assistance, S&G Response, and Sherwin-Williams, along with our partners, Aztec, the Green Parts Specialist, Endasa, Innovation Group, and Prasco UK. We look forward to you joining us next time at ARC360 On Demand.